Stella, an absolute pleasure to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been speaking about how lucky we are, both of us, to have recordings of the voices of the people that we've lost. Obviously, in your case, your mum, Sharon, and in my case, my dad, Tom. And it's a very particular, special thing to have those recordings. Can you speak a little bit about that, Stella?
Yeah, I've got quite a few recordings, and it's one of those things that you don't really think about until you've gone through what we've gone through of losing somebody, and all of a sudden you start desperately going through your messages and live loop photos as well. I've been going through just to get like snippets of my mum's voice because it just makes me smile every time I hear her voice. So one of the voice messages I've got is just where she left me a message about a birthday present for my brother. I don't know when it would have been, maybe in the last few years. But at the end, she kind of, the way she says, "Okay, call me back, love you, darling," and it's so her, and the way that she says it. And sometimes I've been through evenings where I've just almost sat and listened to it on loop, just keep rewinding, listen, rewinding, listen. And I love hearing her voice and having it there. And it's one of those things that I've done my backup on my phone now to make sure that I never lose those conversations. And I want them there. And even like my sons have said to me, "I can't remember what Nanny sounds like," and I'm like, "Well, have a listen." And I've got those sort of messages with her voice, which to me still feels so present.
Do you
You know,
feel that
it's
she's close?
yeah, very much so. And it's taken me a long time to come to that. And again, it's something that I never really thought about until I lost my mum. And you kind of go through that sort of anger and bitterness at the start and not understanding it. And then I've kind of feel like I've come out of that. It's been 2 years and what date are we on today? 20th, 26 days since mum died. And I feel really close to her now. Like it's almost come full circle, and I've kind of had to accept that she's not here anymore in the way that she was. She's not at the end of the phone anymore for me to call every day and sort of say, "What you're having for lunch," or "What you're watching on telly at the minute." She's not around to go for coffees with, but I kind of hear her voice in my head every day when I'm at work or when I'm dealing with my sons or something. I might just kind of go, and I can almost hear her saying, "Chill out."
Yes, let's listen to your audio now.
Just ring back to get a minute. Bye, darling. Love you.
She always used to sign off like that. Is that right? A phone call?
Yeah, she was very much sort of usually had the word darling and stuff when she said goodbye to me, happy go lucky sounding. So that's, to me, that's the real mum sound and sign off, and same with her text messages. We always used to joke in the family, her text messages would always have like, 50 kisses and 20 emojis. Then again, I've still got all of her messages on WhatsApp and on my phone that I'll sit and scroll through sometimes. And I love to have those memories of her. And that's all I've got now, real world of mum, to those photos, voice snippets, messages, all of those things you kind of like grab hold of, and you just want them all around you.
And my dad had a very sort of deep giggle. Obviously I've captured on audio, which is great to listen to. The recording between dad and my mum, they had this really nice banter going on generally, and that sort of interplay is just brilliant to have for time immemorial, really. So I think we're both very fortunate.
Yeah, we're so lucky, I guess, this day and age. We don't have anything of my granddad, for example, who died in 1995. We've got the photos and things, but we don't have anything to remember his voice. But that said, I still remember his voice. I can close my eyes and hear his whistle and stuff. So it's, we're lucky that we've got them, that they're there at the drop of a hat to listen to. But I don't think it would ever stop me remembering her voice in a lot of ways.
Yes, I also remember coming across a photo of my father with my daughter, a photo that I'd forgotten I'd ever taken but hadn't seen in absolutely years. And there was this sort of thrill. It was a sort of almost a rediscovery of him, but it was really lovely but unusual.
Yeah, and I think I've enjoyed things like that as well, when I found photos that you maybe took that didn't mean much at the time. Like the last photo I have with my mum, I was at her house. It was a really horrible rainy day. We were kind of in that horrible phase of tearing, It was in November 2020, and I'd taken the boys down during half term, and I'd had a really stressful week at work. And my dad was in the front room with the boys, and me and my mum were just having a cup of tea and messing around with a pack of cards that we'd been playing with the boys. And for some reason, I just said, "Oh, let's get a photo of us being miserable," and held up my camera and have this photo. Neither of us look particularly great in it, but it is that last photo that now I look at and I kind of think, gosh, it was, that was really lovely. I took that totally for granted, that we were having a cup of tea and just to chat about work, and that the tier systems for COVID were a bit annoying. That meant that we couldn't really go out and do much, and that's another sort of photo that I'll treasure. But also I've got photos where we're at my brother's wedding, for example, or something, which have so much meaning now, because all of those photos are kind of like the last times, the last wedding that mum will come to with us, the last birthday, the last everything. So
I totally understand that. I was frantically looking for a photo from my dad's last Christmas. I always take lots of photos, and for whatever reason, that Christmas I didn't take one, and was frantically asking relations, did you happen to take a picture? And no, so I'm sort of, beating myself up for that, really.
Yeah, that's really tough. I think that's one of the saddest things, isn't it, when you lose somebody, all of those regrets that you have. Where there was one message, a text message that my mum had sent me, and it said it was missed call, and then underneath I'd replied and said, just about to present to a math room full of people, can't talk, speak later, kiss kiss. And that was sort of in October 2020, and now I look at it and I think, why were you so busy that you couldn't speak to your mum? That's ridiculous. It's just you put things into perspective, don't you? Because you're like, what I wouldn't give now for her to call me and me to pick up the phone, and I'd drop everything for that, just for that sort of 10-minute chat of what did you watch last night, what are you doing this weekend. But life is life, isn't it, unfortunately, and you never know what's around the corner. So sometimes you don't get those calls, or you do have to send someone to voicemail, and that does make me sad when I think about those times where maybe I wasn't there. And that you can beat yourself up about those kind of things and kind of go, I should have picked up that call, or I should have done this.
Thank you. Tell me, who was Sharon? What was she like as a mum, as a person?
Yeah, she was lovely, really. I mean, she was just like your normal person, walking along, getting on with her life, doing her thing, working. She was a few years off of retirement. She'd just turned 64. For me, as my mum, she went through so many different roles, because little girl, she was like the doting mom, always there for me, let me sleep with her when I was probably should have been sleeping in my own bedroom, and never fussed over it. Good mum during my teen years, and then in my 20s kind of became a good friend, because she was quite young when she had me. She was 20 years old, so we suddenly found we had a lot in common through my 20s. And then when I went into my 30s, she was there for me when I had both of my boys, and was kind of the sort of person that I'd phone up after a rubbish day, and she'd sort of make me, would never judge me, would let me know that you're doing a good job, kids are a nightmare, just tomorrow's a new day. And I loved that about her. And my husband said to me, what do you miss most about your mum? And I was like, I just miss having that person that never judged me, that was kind of always there at the end of the phone, or always there for a coffee, that never judged you when you said, I've had this rubbish day or whatever. And that's really, I'll never get that from anyone else. That was her unique perspective. She was very, very chilled out. She absolutely loved upcycling furniture, and I've got lots of her furniture in my house now. She was really, really into that. If mum could paint it, she'd get out her Annie Sloan paints and go for it. She absolutely loved chill out music. She loved shopping, and she always used to call it mooching, because it wasn't necessarily about buying stuff, but it was more about mooching around the shop and just having a look. And it usually entailed having about 3 coffees on the way round. For me, she just played so many roles throughout my life. The last couple of years have been really difficult, knowing that she's not there on a day-to-day basis, and that I've had to kind of change my relationship with her, because where I've got to is I believe that she still exists somewhere out there. She's still there watching over me, watching over my siblings, and she's not there every day anymore to sort of be on the end of the phone or to be able to visit, but somewhere she is still there. And I've that's taken me a long time to kind of get through that grief to where I am now, which is trying to be more positive and, you know, live my life in a way that would make her proud and also not waste any opportunities.
We'll come on to the sort of theme of this series, which is just how complicated grief, COVID-19 grief is, and the sort of surreal, almost dreamlike element of that loss. I wanted to ask if there's a particular standout memory that you have that you cherish now, whether it's mooching around or a happy time, anniversary, or anything that you revisit quite often.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in my 20s, we went to Paris together quite a few times on sort of weekend trips. So I have some really fond memories of that. And me and one of my sisters went to Paris at the end of last year. I was kind of saying to my sister, oh, Mum and I came here and we sat and had coffees. And so, you know, having those memories is really precious. But probably the most recent memory was in September 2020. We sort of had a small surprise birthday party for Mum. Because again, I think we'd come out of that initial first wave of COVID. We had the summer and we were kind of getting into the stage where we could have small gatherings in the garden. So we had a lovely day. Mum was coming up with my dad and two of my sisters, but I'd also invited along both of my brothers and their partners as well to come in as a surprise. And we just had such a fun day, you know, and it's funny because it wasn't a particularly special birthday for her. You know, it wasn't her 60th, it was her 64th. So there was no reason really for us to do that, other than the fact that we kind of felt like we'd not really had been able to have a gathering because of COVID. But yeah, it's such a great day, and we'd like planned a few outdoor games. We'd planned a really silly routine for some of my siblings to come in and surprise her through the back garden gate. We were playing that silly song, Happy Birthday to You, and I just put it on and was sort of like, oh, this is a good song, isn't it, Mum? And then all of a sudden my brothers and their partners all came through the back gate dancing to it, and she thought that was hilarious. And again, you know, things like that, you kind of go, that wasn't a special birthday, so why did we do all of that? And I'm so glad we did, you know, just having those really happy times. And that day as well, for some other random reason, my sister-in-law had bought a new camera along, so she was like, let's do family shots. So we've also got some shots of my mum with all the siblings that, again, we hadn't, if you know, of course we take family shots, but posed family shots we don't really do that often. So that on that day, we have like a collection of photos of all of our siblings with my mum. I just think it's so special because, again, we didn't know what was ahead of us. You know, in 2 months after that really nice sunny day in September, Mum was going to get COVID and was going to become seriously ill with it and not come back. And, you know, having those photos and knowing that we had that family time together is so important now.
It's lovely. Talk me through then how your mum fell ill.
Yeah, she contracted COVID through a relative. Was, I'd say, just very fluey initially. So I live about an hour or so's drive from Mum. So I was on the phone to her quite a bit, and she was just saying, "Oh, terrible fluey." And this was at the start of December 2020, and it was my brother's 30th birthday. One of my brother's 30th birthdays on the weekend. So we'd planned a kind of Zoom family get together on the Saturday night, because I think we were in tears by then, and my mum was in Kent, so they weren't allowed to leave their area. So we had the sort of Zoom call on Saturday night, which was a couple of hours because my sister-in-law had planned some games. But we could all see that Mum was unwell. So after about sort of 40 minutes, we were like, why don't you go off to bed? Which she did, sort of waved goodbye to us all. And I kept in touch with her. And then it just got a bit worse sort of by the Tuesday. One of my sisters then called an ambulance. They came, took her in. She was in hospital for 24 hours. And then they let her out, sent her home. And then when she got home, I was keeping in touch with her. She was just sleeping massively. Said she had a terrible headache, but I kind of thought that was just getting through COVID. And then on the Friday, she started being sick, she was a lot worse, and we called another ambulance. That would have been about December the 10th, and then she was taken in. She spent a few days in hospital. She was probably in for 2 days before they put her on the CPAP. We kind of thought it was all going to be all right. I think that's the thing, that we were so naive in a way, because mum wasn't considered high risk. She certainly wasn't old, you know, she just turned 64. Everything that the sort of nurses were saying to us seemed quite positive. You know, we'll put her on the CPAP, that will help. I was still texting mum. You know, I had a conversation with her on the Saturday night, quite a long conversation. I was watching a film, and I remember the conversation was about the film I was watching, and then it just all went really wrong at the start of the following week. And then on, I think, the 15th of December, they called me and said that she was gonna be intubated, go onto the ventilator, which at that moment I knew wasn't good. You know, they sort of had said to me, we don't want people to go on ventilators really, but we're sure the CPAP will work. So she went onto the ventilator. We didn't get to speak to her. She'd already been ventilated by the time they called us. It just all seemed a bit manic, to be honest. I mean, it was a bit of a nightmare getting hold of the nurses anyway. But we were told that mum had signed the form to say that she was happy to be intubated. Presumably, she was in quite a bit of distress at that moment anyway, so felt it was the right thing to do. And then a few hours after she'd been intubated, or as she was being intubated, we got another call to say that she'd had to be resuscitated because she technically had, I suppose, a heart attack from a clot on her lung. A COVID clot is how they described it to us. And again, for someone with no pre-existing heart conditions, that just seemed crazy, but that put her into a really bad way then. And they told us on that day that she wouldn't make it through the day, and that a relative should come in and say goodbye. So we did all drive down to Kent to the hospital, and my brother had already gone in. But then she made it. That was the 15th of December. She made it through the night, and then she made it every day after that up until the 25th of December, when my brother did the call in the morning, and they sort of said, oh, the doctor will be calling you later. And again, really naively, we'd kind of told ourselves, you know, no one ever dies on Christmas Day, so let's just try. We were all at our individual homes in lockdown. Let's just try and get on with Christmas Day, do our calls to the hospital, keep strong for mum. But that call kind of changed everything on Christmas morning. And my brother sort of messaged the siblings and said, apparently the doctor's going to be calling one of us to talk about mum. And that's when my eldest brother got the call. He was most local to the hospital, so he was kind of the named person to be close by. And they sort of said to him, you know, we asked you to come to the hospital today because this is end of life now today. And she passed at about, I think it was 8:15 p.m. on Christmas Day, and my brothers called and let me know. And
my word,
it was probably, I'd put it up there with the worst moment of my life. You see these things on TV where people let out this like unbearable cry, and that's exactly what happened. I remember just sort of almost falling to my knees and just in absolute disbelief that somebody could be taken away from me that I love so much. And sorry, it's quite emotional.
Take your time.
And then my husband said, I need to go and tell the boys, and they were upstairs lining up their Christmas presents because they were, youngish at the time. I can't do the calcs at the minute, 11 and 9. So they knew that my mum was poorly, but we had kind of filled their heads with, Nanny will be fine, she's just being looked after by the hospital. And he went up and told them both, and then I heard their feet running down the stairs, and we just all clumped together basically. Just remember just being hugged then, with them crying as well. And that was Christmas Day 2020.
When she rallied, did you at that point feel that she would be okay?
When she was intubated? Yeah, we really did. I don't know whether I still don't feel like I have all the answers on that, and I have sort of had to move on from it a bit. It was really difficult to get hold of any nurses. Sometimes we used to take it in turns to phone, because sometimes it could take you up to an hour to get through. The nurses were probably sometimes falsely positive, and then you'd get a nurse who'd be really down. So it was like a roller coaster. The 10 days when mum was on the incubator, sometimes they'd be like, yeah, she's doing well. And then other times you'd have a nurse that would just come on and say, well, she's 100% on the ventilator. You know, this is difficult. And we had a few calls with the doctors where they'd said she's in critical condition. this is really serious. But I think you have to have hope at times like that, don't you? And I think we really did have hope. We talked about mum coming home and, you know, who would look after her. You know, we talked positively. We didn't actually believe that this would happen to us. So yeah, we were probably a bit naive. I'm not sure if some of my siblings were. I feel like my older brother probably had a bit more of a gauge. He's a different person to me. I feel like me and the younger siblings possibly felt that she was coming home, and you know, that's certainly what we told all the grandchildren as well. So it was a real shock, you know, those days after Christmas and then into January planning a funeral was just absolutely surreal. I didn't speak to a doctor until March 2021 about why they thought mum had died, you know, 3 or so months after. And even then, you know, the doctors, they don't really have any answers. They don't know. They don't know why some people go in, and, you know, the doctor actually said to me, we just don't know. When someone comes in at the moment with COVID, we can't call it. You know, all we know is that we're at emergency levels and we're doing the best we can, but we just don't know who's going to survive this and who isn't, who's going to respond to the CPAP, who isn't, who's going to be intubated, who's not. And I think the general sense is, I think the doctors and nurses were, you know, clueless in a lot of respects to this virus and what it could do to people. I don't have any blame towards the doctors and nurses. I mean, everyone that was caring for mum was round the clock and, you know, did a brilliant job. But, you know, I wish things could have been different. I wish maybe she hadn't been sent home that first time. I wish maybe. It's very difficult because I feel like she was unlucky because her age was slightly on the younger side of 60. She didn't have any major health conditions. I think that she was probably pushed to the side a little bit as she'll be fine. We'll just keep giving her oxygen. And actually the problem with COVID, from what I understand of it, is that it's a silent killer sometimes in your body. So people that seem like they're coping with it okay are actually having so much damage done to their lungs, and the amount of fluid building up in there means that there's no option for them to be ventilated. But once they're ventilated, nothing can get through, because their lungs are so swollen and they're in such a bad state. And, you know, that's heartbreaking. For me, for the first, maybe up to the first year after mum died, I would lie awake at night just feeling so scared for her and wondering how she felt in those moments before she was intubated, when she was on the CPAP. You almost, it's a bit sick really, but you almost try to recreate it in your head because you're just desperate to try to understand what they went through. But it would never do me any good to know. I know that, but it's something that you feel you have to do. It's a sort of process that you have to go through.
Sure. Was there a goodbye? Were you able to see her body? There was a funeral. Tell me about those.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we went into lockdown, I think, on January 1st. 2021 for those few months. So we were allowed to have a small funeral. I think it's under 20 people. So we just kept it to siblings with partners, and then a couple of very close relatives of my mum's. And then we had the funeral was online then. We weren't allowed to we had to keep in our own household group basically for the funeral. In terms of the situation, it's very difficult because I really, really wanted to see mum, to see her body, and I know that a lot of people don't want to do things like that, but for me it was something that I really knew I wanted to do. I'd done it with my nan, I'd done it with my granddad, and closure seems like quite a harsh word for it, but I do believe, for me personally, just being able to say goodbye and just, you know, hold their hand one last time is important. But we were told quite early on that that wasn't going to be possible, that we could sit in a room with the coffin, but that there wouldn't be any sort of open casket or any sort of chapel of rest in that traditional sense. So that was really hard. That really cut me up. The thing is, though, there were so many things put on us by COVID. You know, I'm a couple of years into the grieving process now, and when I look back at all the various things, I kind of think, would they have changed anything? And actually, you know, the loss would still be there. Mum's still gone, whether I got to see her body or not, she's still gone. So, you know, COVID made that grieving process hugely difficult. But where I am today is trying not to dwell on things like that because they don't change what's happened. You know, my mum isn't here anymore, and that's desperately sad, but I have to I can't let all of the sort of bitterness and resentment of everything that happened, of, you know, how she caught COVID, or how I can't let that eat away at me. Yeah, I have tried to put it behind me, I think, because the first year was so tough, just lying awake at night thinking about all of those things. You know, she didn't have a decent funeral, I didn't get to see her body, you know, all those things that would normally be so important to me personally didn't happen, you know, and that is difficult. She, you know, she didn't deserve that. I'm pretty sure none of the people that died of COVID deserved that, or, you know, people that died during the pandemic but not of COVID. You know, that was a really difficult time. I found myself like Googling, you know, grieving, and some of the things that they suggested, like, you know, being with family, hugging family, all of those things were taken away and we couldn't do. So it was like, oh, how do I cope? Because the goals had changed, hadn't they, for COVID? You know, everything was different.
Sure. And because these rituals didn't take place or were denied, many COVID bereaved have struggled, are unable to close the circle. And you've spoken very vividly to me about a couple of dreamlike experiences that you've had. One of them you mentioned trying to reach your mum through a perspex screen. Can you elaborate a bit on that? What happened there?
Yeah, that was a dream I had quite early on, actually. And it was a bit of a recurring dream, probably in those first few months after mum had passed, where there would usually be some kind of perspex screen and I could see her. She'd quite often be sitting in her dressing gown. She'd love being cozy in a dressing gown in the evenings, and she'd be watching TV and I'd kind of be banging, but all I could hear is me being muffled and not being able to, you know, get to her or tell her how I felt. And, you know, I do remember feeling really desperate at that time in terms of wanting to be able to sort of rip that perspex screen away and talk to her. And those dreams were really difficult. They left me feeling totally exhausted the next day. And, you know, it doesn't take a genius to read into those dreams and what they mean. You know, I wasn't with mum in the hospital. It was a limit to how many people could be with her. That was really difficult. I mean, naturally, if you have a relative that end of life, you would be with them, you would be holding their hand, and we were given those restrictions of, you know, only 1 or 2 people are allowed in most places. I think that was the case, but also you were given this horrible fear of, if you go in, you could get this as well, and someone in your family could get it. And that was the scariest thing ever, because I look at my mum, and if you'd have said to me at the start of the year, you know, do you think your mum's gonna have passed by the end of the year? I'd have said definitely not. So I was really scared of COVID. I had no idea how it had suddenly come into our lives. And, you know, I think all of us siblings felt that sort of a fear of, what if it can do this to mum, what can it do to other people?
It was a very scary time, you know, it really was.
Yeah.
Then to sort of normal public life, really, and gave rise to, you know, so many different reactions and behaviours, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned another dreamlike sequence, or a dream, in fact, to do with the telephone and your mum.
Yeah, I actually had this dream last week. It was lovely. I dream about my mum quite a lot, actually, and so does one of my younger sons. And my husband does as well. It's funny. My mum seems to just appear in all of our dreams quite a lot, and I love it because it's time when I get to see her back in that, you know, in her body, and it's just amazing. But the dream last week, I was just in a house, not sure which house. I think there were a few dogs around, and someone was there, and the phone started ringing, and they picked it up and they said, "Is your mum on the phone?" And I was like, "Oh, it can't be my mum, you must be mistaken. My mum's dead, she's passed away." And they were like, no, they do this, you need to speak to her. And I was like, what? Took the phone, and without a doubt, it was my mum. You know, she was like, "Hi, Stella." And it sounded so real. I just remember just feeling so happy in the dream. And I was, "Mum, are you okay?" And she's like, "I'm fine. I'm really busy. I'm really happy. I'm, you know, doing my thing. Don't worry about me." And I was like, "Mum, I desperately need to talk to you. I need to talk to you." And then the phone just went silent and she wasn't there anymore. And I just gave it back to the person and kind of woke up shortly after that, just feeling amazing. Like, every morning when I wake up, my husband usually says to me, how you feeling today? Did you have a good night? And I said to him, had a dream about my mum. It was amazing. And it was, I love having dreams. If she could visit me every night in my dreams, that would be the ideal.
That sets you up for the day. You're cloud nine, really, I imagine.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it does. And I hope everybody who's lost somebody sees them in their dreams and gets that, because it is such an amazing feeling. And I've got colleagues at work that I've chatted to about it, and they've told me when they've seen maybe their mum or dad in their dream, and it gives us all such a buzz.
Brilliant.
To think that you've been sort of visited by somebody that you love so much, and they've come to speak to you, and the positivity in that message from my mum of, I'm fine, I'm keeping busy, I'm happy, you do your thing. That's amazing.
Brilliant. Tell me a little bit about your sort of coping mechanisms. I mean, obviously, the manner of your mum's passing, incredibly difficult, the denial of these rituals. What's helped? I mean, obviously, it's a journey. Is there anything that has really made a difference, or just to ease the pain?
I'm really lucky that I had counselling. So I did get offered some free counselling through work, but it was only 6 sessions, so it wasn't much use. But then I did decide to spend some money on actually having a counsellor for a period of time, and she was amazing and really helped me. So I think, just on a basic level, that's been hugely important to me. I think the main thing for me is talking about her. I think there's this horrible thing when people pass away where people think that you don't want to talk about them anymore, or that it might upset you. And yeah, I'm not saying that I'm devoid of feeling. Every now and again I do burst into tears when I'm talking about my mum, but most of the time it just fills me with absolute joy to talk about her and remember funny things about her. And so it's a go area in our house that we talk about my mum. My husband chats about her openly all the time. Both of my sons will chat about her. And, like the other week, my eldest son, he's 13, and he was hoping to get out of football practice because he was feeling a bit cruddy and the weather was a bit rubbish. So we thought the ground might be frozen. And he was like, let's hope Nanny can make this happen for us, eh, Mum?
Oh, brilliant.
And I was like, she's probably a bit busy to be checking out frozen ground. So, and he sort of laughed and said, no, she'll do it. And then literally half an hour later, it got cancelled. And he was like, told you. And, I love that, and I know that my mum would also love that role of being the sort of guardian angel and helping us all out. And I think she'd absolutely love it. And we've also had like an experience where my youngest son thought he saw her in a car. So we were walking to school one day and he was like, look, it's in the car. And we walked fast to catch up with the car. And the car was kind of pulling out, and I could see it was a real likeness to my mum. He was like, that's made my day now. That's made my day. And he literally went to school like jumping along because he was so happy that he'd caught a glimpse of what he thought might have been his nanny. And I think for us, that's what we'll keep on doing. We'll keep seeing her. We'll keep talking about her. She had so many little quirky things that she might say.
Catchphrases or things.
Yeah, I probably can't say them actually, but she just had things that were very my mum. So whenever she went to like park a car, for example, you'd be sitting in the car with her and she'd be like, everyone pray to the angels that we're going to get a parking space. Pray to the parking angels, And that's what we always do now as well. We go into a car park and my husband's like, let's hope the parking angels are here to try and find a parking space. So I think, having those Sharonisms, I guess, and carrying those on. And in some ways, the fact that my boys are a little bit older, so they didn't have enough time with their nanny, but, the youngest had 9 years, the eldest sort of 10, 11 years. They do have some really good memories of her and things that they did, last time they went to the cinema with her, last time they went to McDonald's. They have all those memories, and I hope that they stay with them.
And I think another one of your coping mechanisms is that you are choosing not to dwell on the things that Boris Johnson and his government did, the flouting of COVID rules. When you were going through everything that you've just described, you've chosen not to be consumed by that injustice, that sort of lack of respect, the criminal behaviour, really, because they set the rules of growth.
Yeah, it's difficult to dwell on too much. you know, there's so much sadness around everything that happened. And again, I believe the government were totally unprepared. We were all unprepared. You know, I was sitting in the office on the day that Boris Johnson first shut down and said we're all going into lockdown. And I was in an office in central London, sort of having a cup of tea, and then sort of quietly packed away my stuff and said, I think I'll go home now. You know, I think everyone was really naive about it. And it's really, really sad. Again, everything that happened with the government, though, doesn't change what's happened.
Sure.
Still gone, and she's not here. So, you know, whilst it's not that I don't believe that they did wrong, of course they did. I have to, for me and for my own mental health, I have to focus on where I'm at now and continuing the relationship with my mum.
Sure.
Away from everything else. I mean, there are things that were more difficult for me, to be honest, than the sort of government situation. And that was more about people. I found work hugely difficult. I didn't take much time off work, and I found it was really difficult in meetings. There was lots of eye rolling about COVID being a pain. And I used to find that really difficult, that people would make sweeping comments about the situation. And I'd be sitting there thinking, you've got no idea. No, you've got no idea. And that was really difficult. And I think for people with, and I still get it now, still have people that make flippant comments. And I think, are you having a laugh? Do you really think I want to talk about whether I think the vaccine's a good idea or not? You know, but that's humans for you, isn't it? And you know, the other, I guess the thing is that if, for example, you'd lost a relative to cancer, you wouldn't expect to go into a meeting and have everyone sort of rolling their eyes going, oh, this cancer thing's a total pain. Couldn't have my birthday party at the weekend because of it. Or I couldn't do this. Ditto with putting on the news or putting on the TV, you know, it was just everywhere at that time. And that was really difficult to get away from it. And I found it hugely difficult to deal with my anger at that time towards people, towards everyone. I almost felt probably the lockdown was the best thing for me at that time, just being in the house with my husband and sons who were sensitive to me and what had happened, because I'm not sure I would have massively coped in the real world. I found Zoom calls extremely difficult with people that were insensitive towards COVID. So maybe it would have been different for me had I have had to go out and do the school run every day and, you know, actually interact with people. I think I would have really struggled.
It's a curious thing, isn't it, that loss, death to COVID is sort of completely delegitimized, really, in the way that, as you said, you know, those conversations would never be had about cancer, for example.
Yeah. And, you know, I do remember being in a meeting and a guy kind of saying, like, I mean, I don't know a single person that's even had it yet. You know, it's only old people. And I was thinking, oh, you know, that's exhausting that you think that, because
didn't engage with that.
As far as we were concerned, yeah, I don't engage with that. I just turn back to the work that we're doing and focus on work, because people are entitled to their opinions. I know COVID was a huge pain for some people, but you know, COVID broke my heart. You know, it was a bit of a pain as well at times, and I'm not denying that, you know, homeschooling 2 kids, that was difficult. It was a pain, but the impact that COVID had on my life took another road, and actually took someone away from me, didn't allow me to be with them or see them, you know, stole a life really that should have been still here. You know, with my mom would be having another grandchild in 2 months' time, 3 months' time. She should be here to see that. She should have been here to see my son turn into a teenager, you know, and all of those things got stolen away. And I think people will never really understand that until they've been through a loss. I guess is sort of carrying on more positive things. So I think after Mum first died, I put a huge amount of time into sort of the bitterness and the anger, you know, going through hospital notes, looking for errors. And I guess that's changed me a bit now, going, you know, with Mum being gone 2 years, my focus has now gone to kind of continuing things that I know Mum would have been interested in. So she had an ancestry account where she, just for her birthday, a couple of months before she passed, we'd got her DNA done, which meant that she could start tracking all of that. I've now had my DNA done, and I'm sort of linked into Mum's tree and carrying on and trying to understand her family, because she was she sort of had a difficult upbringing where she didn't know who her father was. So there's obviously so much to learn there. And for me, that's the better use of my time, doing something positive to understand mum and her life, as opposed to dwelling on things like doctor's notes and who gave her COVID and those kind of things. That's just helped me to be able to change what I do and how I respond to things.
Great.
I'm grateful for my mum, that I had her for many, many years, that she saw me get married, saw me have 2 children, saw me go through lots of highs and lows, and I'm hugely grateful for that. And I'm also grateful for what she's left behind, because there's 5 of us in terms of siblings, and that's amazing, and again, I'm not saying that there hasn't been highs and lows with my siblings, but we all have each other's backs. We all absolutely adored mum, and again, she's not off limits to talk about. We chat about her all the time. So yeah, I'm really grateful for who she was, and I hope that's kind of made me into who I am and made my siblings into who they are, and that's great. If that was her purpose in life, then it was a really great purpose.
What is her legacy?
I guess all of us. It has to be, doesn't it? That's what she did. Yes, she had a job and stuff, but her legacy was probably bringing all of us into the world, do what we need to do, and teaching us to be kind, good people. She had a wicked sense of humor. She was really quirky. I think that she will live on through all of us. Things that my niece does, for example, remind me of my mum, and things that one of my sisters in particular does remind me of my mum. And so she will live on through all of us. That's amazing.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much for opening up your world to both me and to listeners. I really do believe that you've explained and shared it will be hugely beneficial to people who are in a similar position. I really do.
Thank you. And obviously, I'm extremely sorry for your loss.
Thank you. It's a particular thing, isn't it, grief? I think it's a very personal journey. It's something that you deal with on your own. Really, I've come to realize.
You do, but you find people in funny places, like I've had a new job for last year, and a couple of colleagues got chatting to a young girl one day, and it turned out that she lost both of her parents quite young, and all of a sudden it's opened up a new conversation with somebody, and I've met lots of people like that along the way.
Yeah.
And that's been really nice. All of these people who I'd probably never really thought that much about before, who've opened up to me and said, actually, I lost a baby, or I lost my dad. And you go, wow, how have they got through that? And they have. People are amazingly resilient, aren't they, and get through things.
I think perspective is really helpful, and I've often got it from sharing a moment in time that I'm struggling with, and then only for somebody to sort of share, as you say, their experience, and then perspective really does help. You realize sort of how fortunate you are. I mean, my dad was sort of 89, so that's a lot of time, and as you say, unexpectedly those conversations do help, don't they?
Definitely. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stella.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. Please do subscribe and review the podcast if you get a minute. And if you'd like to make a donation, you can do so via the show notes. The price of a coffee would be fantastic. And also please do follow Stolen Goodbyes on Twitter at RiceKMC and under Stolen Goodbyes on Facebook and Instagram. If you'd like to participate, you can email stolengoodbyes@gmail.com or visit my website www.karen-rice.com. Good luck.